If this doesn't work, we're done. Michael's father had said it on the drive over, not to scare him, to prepare him. The words hung in the car like smoke. They filled every corner, making it hard to breathe. Michael stared out the window at the passing buildings. His stomach twisted tighter with each block they covered. His brothers sat beside him, quiet for once. Even Jermaine, who always had something to say, kept his mouth shut. They all knew what was riding on this. Now, standing in the studio with the microphone looming above him and the engineer adjusting levels behind the glass, those words echoed. Done. No album, no record deal, no second chance, no way to help his family, no way to prove that all those hours of practice, all those nights singing in the garage, actually meant something. His brothers were counting on him. His family was counting on him. What if I let them down? What if this whole dream falls apart because I'm not good enough? The track started. The first note hung in the air, waiting, and Michael opened his mouth. The studio wasn't what he'd imagined. He'd pictured something grand, something that looked like it belonged to people who made real music. But this was smaller, colder, smelling like old carpet and electrical equipment that had been running too long. The walls were covered in foam panels that looked like egg cartons, yellowed at the edges. The microphone stood on a boom stand taller than he was, angled down toward his face like it was already judging him. Behind the thick glass window, 3 men sat in the control room. The engineer in the center, flanked by 2 others Michael didn't recognize. One was writing something on a clipboard, his pen moving in sharp strokes. The other just stared, arms crossed. They looked tired, like they'd already decided this wouldn't work. Michael's hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants, but that only made them colder. The stool beneath him wobbled slightly when he shifted his weight. He froze, terrified he'd knock something over. "Don't move," the engineer had said when he'd first walked in. "Stand still. Don't touch the mic. Don't tap your feet. Don't do anything. We'll pick up everything. Everything." That word kept circling in his head. Every breath, every swallow, every tiny mistake, every moment of doubt. His brothers had recorded their parts earlier that morning. Jermaine on bass lines, Jackie and Tito on harmonies. They'd done fine, not perfect, but fine. Good enough. The engineer had nodded, made notes, moved on. But Michael was the lead. The voice people would hear first. The one that had to carry the whole song. The one that had to make someone stop what they were doing and listen. "You're the hook," his father had told him in the car, his voice low and serious. "If your vocal doesn't grab them in the first 10 seconds, the whole thing falls apart. Everything we've worked for, gone. 10 seconds. That's all he had. 10 seconds to prove he belonged here." The engineer's voice crackled through the studio speaker, distorted and metallic. "Okay, kid, we're rolling. When you hear the count-in, just sing like you practiced. Don't overthink it." Don't overthink it. How was he supposed to not overthink it when everything depended on this? When his family's rent money had gone into this session? When his father had promised people back home that his son was going to be somebody? The track started. A simple 4 count. Click, 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 click. Each one louder than the last, or maybe that was just his heartbeat. And then the music. It was louder than he expected, punching through the headphones with a clarity that made every instrument feel too close, too sharp. The bass line thumped in his chest like a second heartbeat. The guitar rang bright and metallic, cutting through everything else, and underneath it all, a steady drum beat that felt like a countdown, a timer running out. Michael opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Panic shot through him cold and electric. His throat had locked. The first line of the song was right there in his head. He'd sung it 1,000 times, but his voice wouldn't cooperate. It was like his body had betrayed him. The music kept playing. The engineer was watching through the glass, his face unreadable. The two men beside him leaned forward, and Michael could feel their doubt, could feel them thinking the same thing he was thinking. Too young, not ready, not good enough. Sing. The word screamed in his head. Just sing. Anything. He forced the air out. The first word came, shaky and thin, barely audible over the track. His voice cracked on the second syllable. He tried again, louder, but his pitch wavered. He could hear it in the headphones. His own voice, delayed by a fraction of a second, doubling back on itself. It sounded wrong, weak, childish, like a kid pretending to be a singer. Stop. They're going to stop the track and tell me I'm not good enough. They're going to send me home. They're going to tell my father I failed. But they didn't stop. The music kept going, relentless, unforgiving, and something inside Michael shifted. A door opened somewhere in his chest. He stopped thinking about the engineer. Stopped thinking about the men in the control room with their clipboards and their tired faces. Stopped thinking about his father's words in the car, about the pressure, about everything that could go wrong. He thought about the song, about the feeling it was supposed to carry, about what his mother had told him last night when she'd kissed him goodnight. Sing from your heart, baby. That's all you need to do. Not your head, your heart. About the reason they'd practiced it 100 times in the garage until his mother said it was perfect, until the melody had become part of him. He closed his eyes, and he sang. Not the way he'd practiced. Not the way his father had told him to. He sang the way it felt. He let his voice ride the bass line, bending the notes where they wanted to bend, holding the ones that ached to be held. The melody became something alive in his throat, something that didn't belong to the arrangement anymore. It belonged to him. He forgot about the microphone, forgot about the stool wobbling beneath his feet, forgot about the men watching him through the glass, forgot about everything except the music and the feeling pushing up through his chest, demanding to be heard. When he hit the chorus, something happened. His voice opened. Not louder, fuller, richer. It filled the space between the instruments, weaving through the guitar and drums like it had always belonged there, like the song had been written around his voice instead of the other way around. He added a run he'd never practiced, a quick dip and rise at the end of a phrase that felt right in the moment, that felt like the only way that phrase should end. Then another, and another. Each one natural, instinctive, like breathing. In the control room, one of the men sat up straighter. His pen stopped moving. Michael didn't see it. His eyes were still closed. He was inside the song now, writing the pulse of it, feeling the way each word connected to the next, the way the verses built toward something bigger. The second verse came, and he leaned into it harder, adding texture to his tone. Raspiness on the edges where the emotion needed grit, smoothness in the center where it needed to soar. He played with the rhythm, landing just behind the beat on certain words, letting them drag and pull, then pushing ahead on others, giving them urgency. He made the song breathe. The bridge approached. This was the part he'd been most nervous about, the part that had kept him awake last night. The melody climbed higher, and his voice would have to stretch to reach it, would have to find notes he'd only hit a few times in practice. He'd cracked on this section twice during rehearsal. His brothers had laughed, not meanly, but enough that it had burned. His father had made him start over, do it again. No excuses. But here, in the studio, with the track thundering in his ears and the weight of everything pressing down on him, Michael didn't crack. He soared. The note came out clean and strong, vibrating in his chest and throat, filling the studio. He held it longer than the arrangement called for, letting it ring out until the music underneath swelled to meet it, until the instrument seemed to respond to his voice instead of leading it. And when he finally released it, dropping back down into the final chorus, he added a tiny, almost imperceptible growl at the end of the phrase. Something raw and instinctive that he didn't even know he could do. Something that came from a place deeper than technique. In the control room, the engineer's hand froze on the fader. His fingers had been moving, adjusting levels, writing the mix, but now they just stopped. Hung there. The other two men exchanged a glance. One of them mouthed something. The other just shook his head slowly, like he was trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Michael kept singing. The final chorus repeated, building, layering, and he matched it, his voice climbing with the music, finding pockets of space to fill with ad-libs and runs. He wasn't reading the lyric sheet anymore. It was still there, clipped to a stand beside him, but he wasn't looking at it. Wasn't thinking about the words. He was just singing, letting his voice go where it wanted to go, trusting it. The last note came, he held it, let it fade, let the silence creep in slowly, like the song was reluctant to end. And then it was over. The track cut, the music stopped. The studio fell into a thick, muffled quiet that felt heavier than any sound. Michael opened his eyes, the foam panels on the walls, the scuffed floor, the microphone still looming above him. Everything looked the same, but something felt different. Through the glass, the engineer sat perfectly still, staring at him. The man's mouth was slightly open. One hand rested on the console, fingers splayed. The other hung in the air, like he'd forgotten what he was reaching for, like he'd forgotten how to move. The man with the clipboard had stopped writing. His pen was frozen mid-stroke, hovering above the page. The third man leaned back in his chair, slowly, carefully, as if he'd just witnessed something fragile that might break if he moved too fast. No one spoke, and the silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Michael's heart pounded. I messed up. I went off script. I added things that weren't in the arrangement. I did too much. They're going to tell me to do it again. They're going to tell me I need to follow the plan. They're going to tell my father I can't take direction. They're going to... The engineer pressed the talkback button. His voice crackled through the studio speaker, but it sounded different now, quieter, almost uncertain, like he was talking to someone he didn't quite understand yet. Kid, where did that come from? Michael didn't know how to answer. He looked down at his hands, still trembling. I just sang it. The engineer shook his head slowly. No, that wasn't just singing. He looked at the other two men. One of them nodded. The other was smiling. The engineer turned back to the microphone. We're keeping that, first take. That's the one. Michael blinked. We're done? We're done. But don't I need to do it again? In case I made a mistake? The engineer laughed. A short, surprised sound. Mistake? Kid, you just did in one take what most singers can't do in 20. Michael stepped off the stool. His legs felt unsteady. His throat was dry, but something warm and bright was spreading through his chest. The door to the control room opened, and the three men stepped into the studio. The engineer walked over, crouched down to Michael's level, and looked him in the eye. How old are you? 8. The man shook his head again, slower this time. 8 years old, and you just recorded a vocal that belongs on the radio. He stood, glancing at the other men. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've worked with professionals, veterans, people twice your age with twice the training. And I've never heard anyone nail a take like that on the first try. One of the other men stepped forward. The runs you added, the way you bent those notes, did someone teach you that? Michael shook his head. I just felt it. You felt it, the man repeated, his voice almost reverent. He looked at the engineer. We need to sign this kid, today. The engineer didn't argue. He just kept staring at Michael, like he was trying to figure out how an 8-year-old in a too-big shirt and borrowed headphones had just pulled off something most adult singers spent years trying to master. Michael didn't understand what had just happened. He'd just done what he always did. Sing. But standing there in that small studio, with 3 grown men looking at him like he'd done something impossible, he felt something shift. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a singer. And that one take, the one he'd been terrified to start, the one where his voice had cracked and his hands had shaken, had just changed everything.